Hello and welcome to At the 55, your home for OUA football. Me and Tom are back on the mics to break down the Mitchell and Uteck Bowl, the national semifinals. We have our Vanier Cup matchup. It is the Laurier Golden Hawks taking on the Val Rouge et Or, and today is dedicated to the two games that got them there. We'll break down those games. We'll talk about some coaching updates in the OUA, but not before I ask Tom, how the heck you doing, my friend?
I'm doing great, my man. I'm doing great. Thank you for being so hospitable and hosting me so that we could watch both of those games on Saturday. It was a fantastic time, as it always was. And that dip that you made was fantastic. So I appreciate you. What a great weekend of football we had once again.
Shout out to Red Lentils, and unfortunately, that Laval Regina game really took off as soon as you left, having to leave a little bit early. So I can't wait to break that one down since we didn't get a chance to talk it through in person. We'll obviously talk about what Laurier was doing, punching their ticket to Kingston in such convincing fashion. But Tom, some coaching news from the OUA coming out this weekend. What's going on?
In particular, my McMaster Marauders. Coach Scott Brady is no longer going to be a part of the McMaster Marauder program, which is a massive loss for this team here. Coach Brady came to the organization when Scott Knox was still there, I believe in 2018. And has a very impressive resume in front of him. He was the former head coach and defensive coordinator at Mount Allison, the team that I played against in 2014, that had an outstanding defense. He was an AUS champion in 2013 and 2014. And in 2017, he was announced as McMaster's defensive coordinator, During his tenure with Mount Allison, he led the Mounties to 4 straight Loney Bowls and their first undefeated regular season in school history in 2014 when we played against them. He has been unbelievable at McMaster, obviously, for the folks in the maroon who have been watching him, and for everybody else. Even when this team was missing the playoffs, this defense was still at a top tier. We tweeted about it yesterday. He's been a top 3 defense in that range consistently throughout his entire time there. And what he's been able to do with those Marauders has been nothing short of amazing. So he's definitely going to be missed at McMaster.
And really, that top 3 stat was there. Like the only outliers in there was of the last 2 years, where all of a sudden the yards and the points started to rack up a little bit. It's hard not to think of the fact that there was a lot of conversation going into this year about the possibility of him filling that void at Guelph and just the amazing things he could do with that talent there. But overwhelmingly, those defenses were shut down on all aspects, and allowing for those teams with guys like Andreas Duick and then into Keegan Hall having opportunities. And you know what? It's obviously been some tricky years of late. You can speak to that better than I can, but what he's done there consistently has been nothing but spectacular. Now, Tom, we were playing around yesterday with just looking at the coaching staffs of the various clubs. And you obviously mentioned in talking about Coach Brady's legacy that he's already been at a head coaching level and had success there. I know that for a lot of coaches in that realm, because it's such a small space, sometimes that step down, if you will, can be not a death sentence, but it's tough to then rebound back up from it. Same way if you're a coordinator, you go to position coach, so on and so forth. But the talent and what he brings to the table is obviously there. His resume speaks bounds for what he's capable of. When we look at the landscape of OUA teams, the head coaches and defensive coordinators, it's hard to decipher what might be the most obvious spot for him to be able to pick up either a head coaching job, or if you wanted to maybe move laterally and just fill in a program elsewhere. And I'll sort of then hint at as well, part of this conversation is that if he wants to make that lateral move, what does that say about McMaster right now?
Most definitely. And I think that especially with the rumors that we had heard coming out of last year and the almost move to Guelph, I think that his time at McMaster was coming to an end. Why that reason is, we don't know 100%. We obviously wish nothing but the best for Coach Brady, but this doesn't really surprise me. I believe I mentioned to you somewhere in the middle of the regular season or something, or maybe near the tail end of it, saying I'd be shocked if Coach Brady was still back with the Marauders as of next year. Just a gut feeling that I had. But think every other school. So it's obviously you and I were talking about this in terms of the other coaches that are out there, and it's a little bit different in Canada because obviously there's not a whole ton of revenue coming into these schools because of the football programs, and that's not drastically affected by wins and losses and everything. So that doesn't typically matter as much here. However, the big piece that matters is culture. Culture on a team, making sure that everybody's happy with the program, with their coaches, and everything else. So not only is this a proven winning both head coach and defensive coordinator, but this is somebody who, in talking with a lot of the McMaster Marauder players, absolutely love this man. He brings a positivity to that program. He brings an energy to that entire team, and the players rally around him like crazy. After the announcement was made, my timeline was flooded with players saying how great of a leader this man is, how much he changed and affected the lives that are here. So every single coach out there, especially those head coaches and defensive coordinators, I'd be sweating a little bit. Unless your names is Michael Faulds, Coach Ron Van Werkerk, Greg Marshall, Paul Gleason, unless you've got that kind of a pedigree, I'd be sweating a little bit because this is one of the greatest coaching grabs that you could get. And right now he's a free agent. And in speaking to him, he doesn't have a clear destination in mind. So this is an interesting time for sure.
It really is. And in part, what makes it that much more fascinating that he made this move without having a clear destination in mind. And it's not uncommon that we see coaches, whether coordinators, head coaches, anywhere in between, just saying, maybe I just need a year off, or maybe I need to, move closer to home, be closer to family. And that was certainly one of the rumors that was going around in talks of him maybe leaving Mac last year and perhaps him going back out east, which is a possibility that you and I were kind of playing through a little bit. The thing again that is it's hard to detach from when you think about, because there's a lot of new coaches in the OUA, right? Obviously, we talk about the three that came in last year with Coach Soria, Coach Janke, and Coach Adams. You look at guys like Corey Grant, who've now been in the third year there, and though the success has fluctuated a little bit, there's been obvious growth. And you mentioned that key word in culture, and he is undoubtedly a culture setter. You think about a guy in Coach Belfay, and just his priors make him, he'll only ever leave there if he wants to, so on and so forth. Then you get into the range of guys who've been in their programs the length of Coach Snyder and Coach Cercelli with Queens and Windsor respectively, and they've obviously had success. So you go through all these teams, and then you get into that range of guys where it's like, again, they'll only leave unless they want to. You come back to it and you say, well, then what would be the opportunity for him to take a head coaching spot in Ontario? And it comes back to saying, golly, like, this isn't me asking for Potasik's job, but it's like, he'd been there, what, 7 years, you said? He'd had so much success there. He'd been part of a championship team that if they want to make a move at the head coaching position, you have the guy who's established that culture and has established a success in addition to it as a defensive coordinator. So the fact that he leaves, again, it'll be interesting to see what comes of this story of kind of what's going on in Hamilton, because there's got to be a story. But out east maybe is where it then also alludes to. Maybe we're overthinking it, and maybe the answer lies out in the AUS or another conference altogether, but that would be the more obvious connection to play.
Yes, most definitely. When you start thinking about, especially if there's no clear destination in mind, you and I start thinking about where are possible connections. Obviously, he was coaching out east for a long time. I believe, I don't know 100%, but I believe his family, or at least a big chunk of his family, is from out east as well, or something out there. So that would obviously be a big reason to go back there and to do whatever else. He certainly has a lot of ties out east. But then you start thinking about what other coaches does he have ties to? And you and I kind of got excited because who did he win a championship with in 2019 but Coach Corey Grant? Now, albeit also Coach Todd Galloway, but I think Ron Van Werker is going to be pretty secure in that job. But Coach Corey Grant, and not to say that his defensive coordinator at Carleton isn't in a secure job by any means, but obviously the two of them were working together. They clearly had success winning the Yates Cup together. Is there a potential there to potentially go back with a familiar face? The other side of this as well, in that 2017 and 2018 year when he was on the staff, was the offensive coordinator was Tom Flaxman, and now he's back out at Acadia. And so does he say, hey, you know what? Out east is calling. I could go back to Wolfville and I could potentially help a program that, well, has been struggling as of late get back into form that way. I think there's a lot of options here just off of the quick thinking that you and I just did there. But obviously, any university worth their stuff is going to take a look at this guy and say, hey, if we got a shot here at all, yeah, absolutely. Let's try to dial this up.
And then last thing that has to be raised in the nature of this conversation is to say that Mac currently has a vacancy for their defensive coordinator position, and you had brought this name up as soon as you popped in yesterday, and then told me about this whole story. And frankly, I can't think of a better candidate available for it. So, Tom, when you're thinking about who might take the reins of your alma mater's defense, who's that man?
To me, that man is Coach Adam Grandy, linebacker and special teams coach right now for the Western Mustangs. This is a guy who's had extensive experience in U Sports. He was the defensive coordinator at Guelph for your Guelph Griffins, my Guelph Griffins,
Everybody's Guelph Griffins.
From 2016 to 2018 under Coach Kevin McNeil there. And obviously spent a lot of time as a linebacker coach with Guelph as well and has done a number of other roles. But the big piece of that as well is that not only does he have this great U Sports coaching record, he's also been on Team Ontario's coach and U18 Team Canada coaches. So he's got great relationships with the newest recruits that are up and coming. So he'd be a huge get as well. He's a fantastic person. I had a chance he actually coached me way back in the day at Stamps as well. He's my head coach. Just a fantastic dude. I coached with him, excuse me. But the other piece of this as well is that he's a MAC guy. He went to McMaster. He was a part of that 2003 Yates Cup team. He played linebacker for them. I mean, this is the best case scenario for a defensive coordinator in that you welcome back a MAC alum to come back and to take over the defense from an outstanding defensive coordinator. So to me, Coach Grandy is the clear pick.
I love it. I love it for him, and I love it for that program. And he's obviously a horseshoe guy. So as far as the recruiting side of things and everything like that, it's geographically perfect. It's an awesome pick. And you know what though? Going back to Brady, if he and sorry, and that would then raise the question of then, well, that's a special teams coordinator gap that then Western has to fill. Then who's put in that position, right? But let's not play around with too many hypothetical scenarios at once, or I'll go cross-eyed. If Brady goes back out east, it'll certainly be part of what I think is undoubtedly a bit of a renaissance of AUS football. We love the fight St. Mary's gave in that Loney Bowl. Obviously, what St. FX has been doing with Coach Waterman. And these Bishop's Gators, who despite falling in the Uteck Bowl, we're looking for real. So let's take our talents to Lennoxville, Quebec. Tom Sterling. One more thing from you. My apologies.
Sorry, just one last thing here.
Good transition going, brother. Damn it.
You've mentioned it a little bit. I've had a number of people reach out to me, including one Dan Forrest on Twitter. I appreciate you, sir, and just asking me my thoughts about Coach Stefan Potasic as a head coach at McMaster. The quick thing that I want to say is that from a win standpoint, I mean, Coach P gave McMaster its only ever Vanier Cup. He's won multiple Yates Cups during his time there. Obviously, in my time, 2011, 2012, and 2014, then obviously in 2019. He's got great connections in the community. People love him there. I really think that Coach Potasic, while certainly being a part of some less than stellar teams in 2021, 22, and 23, is getting the right people in place and is trying to really reestablish what that culture at McMaster certainly looks like. Coach Chris Hopkins as the offensive coordinator was a fantastic move this year. We saw a marked jump in the production of the offense going into this year than we saw in previous years. And Keegan Hall obviously having the historic year that he had. Losing a guy like Scott Brady is a detriment to any coach for sure, but potentially bringing in Adam Grandy, like all of the reasons that we just mentioned. I'm still very high on the potential that this McMaster Marauder team has with Coach Potasic. I think he's a fantastic person. I think he does a great job with making sure that the culture on the team in terms of the players is as solid as it possibly can be. And the best way for him to do that, the way that we were able to be so successful in 2011, 2012, and 2014 is by him getting the right coaches in place and still enacting the same message from the top down. He's gotten into a little bit of issues, I think, in the previous years where he was doing everything. He was the head coach, he was the offensive coordinator. I think he was coaching some positional groups as well, as you do as you're an OC, and that's too much responsibility for him to have. Now putting his trust and his faith into Coach Chris Hopkins, even if he's helping him as well and teaching him along the way, he can now step back and truly be the head coach. Find another defensive coordinator that you really trust and just let your guys do their thing. I still very much believe in Coach Potasic.
And you have all the right reasons to do so. You know what? It was interesting when we were talking yesterday about just all things OUA U Sport football. I'd asked you at one point, what was Potasic's first year, his first stint with Mac leading up to that Vanier? And you said what?
2006
2006. When was his last? And that was as head coach?
as head coach.
What was his last year with Laurier as a player?
Oh, as a player, I'd have to look that up. But his last year as a coach at Laurier was obviously 2005.
With 2005. And so I just say all this and saying that all this man knows is coaching and coaching at a high level. And as the head coach, as you allude to, which often involves coordinating other coaches.
Mm-hmm.
And, that Coach Potasic tree is grow. We obviously talk about the Greg Marshall tree, and rightfully so. That Potasic tree is growing and bearing fruit that has been spread all throughout the OUA. Scott Brady, obviously, though, having priors before working with Potasic, if I understand that whole history correctly, but nonetheless added to that, along with guys like Todd Galloway, along with obviously Greg Knox, along with Corey Grant, so on and so forth. It's been a tough couple of years. And you brought up 2021. That's not even fair because that was OUA West where they go 3-3. They're missing. Like that was just a bonkers year. Even if they lost to U of T in the process, which they might have that year, I think that was the one that kicked them out of the playoffs. But anything left on Mac for now, Tom?
Yeah, I mean, the very last thing that I'll say, obviously, we talked about his coaching at McMaster, but like you alluded to, he was a player at Laurier. He won a Vanier Cup at Laurier as a player. He went back as he went back as a coach, was the offensive coordinator when he won another Vanier there, and then went to McMaster and won another Vanier there as a head coach. He's done it as a player, an OC, and a head coach. This is the guy that you want leading this program. That's all I got to say.
He's one of the best you can get. Let's take our talents out to Lennoxville because there is still football being played that we want to celebrate and revel in. And it was this year's edition of the Uteck Bowl, AUS hosting OUA. And as we anticipated, we came out on top. Laurier picking up the win 48-24 over the Bishops Gators. Tom, we were impressed early on with some of the front seven ability, the ability of the front seven, I should say, of Bishops getting to Elgersma and causing some pressures and actually like properly taking them down. Or, sorry, my apologies, Tom. Should we be talking players of the week first? Did I skip over that? Okay, hold on a second. Well, we're not straying far from it. Rewind. Not straying far from this game. Let's do players of the week. And offensively, we are going to be in this game nonetheless because number 13 balled out on in momentous fashion.
Yes, he did. And I mean, when you look at the numbers like this, 30 for 34, 452 yards and 5 touchdowns, it's incredible. But I do want to also quickly say that he was recognized as the offensive player of the game in this game, but then gave his award, and maybe we should do the same thing to his guy in Ryan Hughes. 8 catches, 212 yards receiving, and 3 touchdowns. When you talk about a breakout star, in the last 2 games, he has led the receiving yards for the Laurier Golden Hawks that has guys like Ethan Jordan, Leomi Ojetalile, Ryan Spate. Like, this is an all-star cast, and a second-year guy has been leading these receiving yards in the past 2 games, which, by the way, were the Yates Cup and a national semifinal.
It was very kind of Taylor to share that bagged lunch that he won as offensive player of the game in the national semifinal with his guy and Ryan Hughes. And hey, I'm all on board with that. But man, just like 30 for 34 for 452, 5 touchdowns, no interceptions. Like this is the bloody national semifinal game. That's ridiculous. And what I love the most about this game, and again, we'll still go through our defensive special teams player of the week, but just in the nature of this conversation, they do get Isaac Willis some run, getting him in there for 2 attempts, going 2 for 2 there. they weren't going to pull Elgersma out of that Western game for a second, no matter how high up the score got in that one. So just as a retroactive way of being like, yeah, Western, in case you didn't know, they were trying to stick it to you from every aspect. As soon as Wills came in the game, I'm like, oh, I didn't realize they actually know that they can take out Elgersma when they're blowing teams out, but not when it's Western that they're playing, nonetheless. So sorry, who's the shout out? Who's the player of the week, Tom? I'll let you decide that one.
You know what? I'm going to switch things up. The shout out is to Taylor
Isaac,
Elgersma. The player of the week is Ryan
Isaac
Hughes.
Willis. No. All right. Well, hey, great job by them nonetheless. We'll talk about that game briefly for our defensive player of the week. Let's stay in this game momentarily to give a shout out before we head out west. Tom, shout out going to who?
It has to go to the guy who's got the perfect number
Hmm.
55, Mateo La Quintana. 4.5 tackles, 2 sacks, and 2 tackles for loss. In the regular season, he finished with just two sacks in 8 games. In the playoffs now, I believe he's got four,
I
which
believe
is just
so.
unbelievable for a first
Rookie.
year player. This guy
Mhm.
is playing some outstanding football here and coming alive in the biggest game. So shout out to that young man.
It's absolutely bananas, and obviously Laurier picked up the win, so it would make all the sense in the world for it to give it to him. Because frankly, we're going to go to a guy who was actually on the losing side of that Mitchell Bull, Coupe Mitchell from the Regina Rams. Tom, I'll let you talk about this guy. I just want to say the name, defensive back for the Regina Rams, Michael Jordan, coming up clutch like the namesake himself. Man, oh man, they don't win the game, but this guy was part of all the many reasons that coming down the stretch, it looked like Regina was going to pull up this upset.
So the Regina Rams defense, I think, is one of in the 4 teams that were remaining in this weekend. I would say that the Regina Rams defense was the best that we saw here. With how well that they played against the Laval Rougeayor and shutting down Arnaud Desjardins for the majority of the game, it was outstanding. And a big reason for that was this young man in Michael Jordan. He finishes with 4 tackles, but 2 key turnovers. He has 1 fumble recovery and the interception that's in the end zone to keep Laval off the board and to give Regina the chance. And obviously they went up in the fourth quarter. So it has to go to Michael Jordan. With just an unbelievable game that this young man had.
And it was amazing because obviously, and you do such a stellar job of the C to C and staying abreast to everything going on out there. And I do my best come the playoffs time come around. You'd obviously talked a lot about the Sombash brothers, about Delaney Robinson. And man, oh man, this team obviously runs that much deeper. Being able to see a guy like Jordan just have a day of days, and some guys on that D line as well that were
Mm-hmm.
looking pretty fearsome that we'll talk about momentarily. Let's finish off our players of the week by heading back to the Uteck Bowl. And hey, man, let's give some flowers to our guy, 22, Dawson Hodge.
I mean, you have to. When you look at his numbers, he goes 2 for 2 on field goals, 6 for 6 on extra points for a total of 12 points in the victory against the Bishop Gators. He also has 4 punts for 167 yards, and of those four, 2 of them are inside the 20-yard line. Dawson Hodge has been a stalwart kicker for them throughout his entire time and is certainly coming back into form in the perfect time here. So he obviously gets our special teams player of the week.
And those are your players of the week, landing us perfectly in Lennoxville, where I can now talk about this game now that I have my head screwed on properly. Final score again, the Laurier Golden Hawks punching their ticket to Kingston with the 48-24 victory in Bishop's own house. Liam Forsyth, we got a box of Kleenex heading your way, brother. We're hoping you're okay. Tom, this game again started off with a few series where Bishops was doing some positive things on defense, specifically on that front seven. We'll talk a little bit. I'll give you the floor to talk a little bit about somewhat by the X's and O's or the sort of arrangement of those guys schematically, what made it fascinating. But you and me were sitting there being like, because you raised an interesting point of just how much tape teams might be able to get of their opponents at this level. And we're sitting there being like, okay, yeah, I mean, all right, they got to Taylor. I mean, sure, like we expect better of that O line, but they're not there's nothing on this test that those players and more specifically those coaches and Coach Scotto and Coach Galloway and everyone else on that offensive staff aren't going to. There's no codes that they can't crack that say, okay, you got him there. Oh, I can see where that front fooled them on this one. But all right, let's go to the whiteboard. Let's go to the game strat. This will be pretty quick to resolve, and they were seemingly on point in doing just that.
Yeah. For those of you who don't know, I don't know if it's still the same, but when you and I were in those national semifinals fighting for Vanier Cups, you only get 3 games worth of game film from the opposing team from an opposing conference from you. So in this game, Laurier would have received the Loney Bowl, the conference semifinal, and then the last game of the regular season here for Bishops, which, to be fair, like those are really important games, and you're probably showcasing everything you have, especially in that St. Mary's game for Bishops when it came down to triple overtime. But because you only get 3 games, anything that you did previously at the very beginning of the season, that's something that you can now lean on and potentially do something to screw around with a game plan that Laurier might have had. And certainly that's exactly what the Bishop Gators did, lining up in a 3-4 defense. But typically in a 3-4, it's exactly like it sounds. There's 3 down linemen and 4 linebackers, and those linebackers are at depth. In this case, those outside linebackers walked down. So almost like they were ends, but they were probably 5 to 10 yards outside of where a normal end would be. So you technically are still in a 3-4 defense, but you still have outside contained from these guys. And you're almost inviting, hey, why don't you try to run the ball up the middle on us? But those defensive ends, from as well as we can see from a sideline cut, you and I live and die by the end zone cuts. But from those sideline cuts, it looked like they were head up, sometimes even inside those offensive tackles to really try to crash everything in and to disrupt the interior of that offensive line. And then obviously you've got the outside linebackers doing their thing. So in that first drive in particular, there was some confusion going on there. Obviously, they got to Taylor a couple of times in this game, but like you mentioned, you have a guy like Coach Zach Scotto, and you have an offensive line that has seen a whole whack of mess coming out of the OUA here. It took them one drive to really understand this is what's going on, change some rules here, and then the offense really exploded.
And as you had alluded to, it didn't seem like that was something that, at least in the playoff run for Bishops, that they were showing. And you look at, hey, a competitive Loney Bowl, triple overtime, awesome. Their road to that Loney Bowl involved them, blowing out Acadia, wasn't really even close. And their last game of the regular season for Bishops was against Mount Allison. That one wasn't close either. So they really didn't have to show much on film. And it's the fun thing that you and me are watching this game and being like, well, if all of a sudden, instead of a 34, if you just call it a 52, sort of by your rules, does that change things up? And it's a fascinating, one of the most fascinating parts of the game that I love so much. But yes, once they cracked the code, it was somehow a quiet dominance that Laurier was putting on to them. Because by the end of the half, I don't know, I'm trying to remember the score, but it's Elgersmo with just shy of 400 yards. He's over 90% completion percentage, 3 touchdowns already. And again, no Raiden Thorne this one. Ryan Hughes doing what he's doing. You talk about the standpoint of what you're showing to other opponents at this stage. If that's holding true, what you're saying about the amount of tape you get on a team going into a matchup, you think about with Laurier now facing off with Laval. I don't know Raiden Thorne's status. Okay. But if all of a sudden he's healthy for the Vanier and you have Laval going in there being like, all right, hey, number 3 is the key to this offense. Apparently, number 4, Jordan got 1,000 yards, but everything we have of them on tape speaks otherwise to this. I mean, just pay whatever the cost is for OUA TV and you can get all those games, I guess, even if it's not broken down with a sideline and an end zone cut. But it was effortless work by Elgersma and his crew on this day.
Oh gosh, yes. And I'm just envisioning, just as we're talking about this, and we'll obviously get into it a little bit more when we do the preview for the Vanier, but just imagine a scenario where Raiden Thorne comes back. And then I don't think they've shown a whole lot of it going into the season, but a quads look with Laomi Ojatalayo on the line, Ethan Jordan, Raiden Thorne, and Ryan Hughes on one side of the ball. That's a true pick your poison in that, if I've ever seen one, man. So if Raiden Thorne comes back, that's only going to be even worse for opposing defenses. But certainly in this game, we saw an offensive showcase. And the halftime score, 34-3 for the Laurier Golden Hawks, really doing their great thing and showcasing what they were able to do here. And now we watch the Bishop Gators, and in this game, Bishop did what Bishop is really good at in limiting rushing attacks. I mean, Laurier finishes with 163 on the ground for sure, but we don't see the typical production that we normally see from a guy like a Tanner Nelms. He finishes 8 attempts for 61 yards. Now, Tayshaun Jackson, 11 attempts for 81 yards and a touchdown, sure. But I think we saw Bishops really try their best to shut down the run. And for the most part, they did a decent job in that for sure. But the passing attack, I don't think that there's a defense out there right now that is really capable of completely eliminating the passing attack that Laurier has. I mean, when you look at it, we already mentioned, but Ryan Hughes, 8 catches for 212 yards and 3 touchdowns. Ethan Jordan, 9 catches, 76 yards. Leomi Ojetalayo, 3 catches for 52 yards. Jace Atkinson, 4 catches for 48 yards. Ryan Spade, Jackson Stebbings, Jacob Bennett, Anthony Briscoe, Sebastian Parcelidis, Tanner Nelms. Like, you've got so many different options here to throw the ball to, and all of them are deadly in every single way. So it's just outstanding what the Laurier Golden Hawks are able to do here. And, obviously we have nothing but praise for Coach Todd Galloway and everything he's able to do. But when you got talent like this, it does at times make your job a little bit easy.
Absolutely. I mean, it's certainly a team that I'm sure offensive coordinator would love to be able to play around with and drop plays for. And you mentioned 88 Ryan Spate getting into the end zone, but when you're seeing big Parcelidis, that fullback getting in the end zone, again, it speaks to then using a bit of that creativity. Tom, you mentioning the idea of Raiden Thorne coming back and them doing quads. All I can think of in my mind is just bringing Tyler Potvin as a boundary tight end, single back quads to the field, and just say, all right, we're either going to run with our 6 offensive line and a bruiser and Tanner Nelms, or if you're going to play heavy there, we're just going to throw screens out to that 4 side there. And, they were doing a bit of that type of work in using those receiver screens, getting some of those hitch routes all the way to the field to a guy like Leomi, which it's, again, the fact that you have a guy in Taylor who can make that throw with such ease, where he goes through his reads and he can go to his third option, which is just lay sitting there with no one around him because the first and second read have pushed the defensive secondary deep in their coverage responsibilities, and then say, all right, shoot, let me just give it to number 11, big 11, Ojetalayo, with no one within 6 yards of him. So now he gets ahead of steam to be able to get downhill. It's so special what they're able to do. And then all of a sudden, okay, Bishops has to press them up a little bit more. Now they're getting those deep field shots to guys like Ryan Hughes, getting those big looks, those chunk looks down the field. It's really spectacular on the day. And what I loved as well was the fact that you look at the running attack for them. It doesn't knock your socks off. But it's Tayshaun getting the bulk of the work. 11 carries for 81 and a touchdown. Tanner Nelms with 8 carries for 61. Like, he probably left that game being like, can we play the Vanier right now? Like, I'm ready to go. It's a spoil of riches that they have there, and it's easy to then say, okay, Galloway's got the all the tools you could ever imagine, all the weapons you'd ever want. Being able to fairly balance all that out, especially when it comes to receivers, because we know the stereotypes about the personality of receivers. They think every single ball they're open and they should have been the main target on it. There's nothing but just cohesiveness amongst this group. They gel well, and that obviously comes down to leadership from a guy in Taylor, from a head coach in Michael Falls, but as well in Coach Galloway being able to say, I know how to use all my weapons, so we're not completely just one-sided. Yeah.
Yeah, the big piece of that, and the reason why when you look at Ryan Hughes, it is still very clear to me that he is a young player. Because yes, you look at the numbers and you say, oh my gosh, like, look at the receiving numbers that he has. He's clearly a star talent. But what pieces to me that it's not that he hasn't gotten the culture, because obviously he understands the culture. He wouldn't be playing if he didn't. But it's the extra mentality that those receivers have. You see a guy like Ethan Jordan, he finishes with 1,000 yards in the regular season, and obviously he's an incredible receiver. But you watch what these receivers do when another receiver catches the ball. when Laomi Ojutalayo catches the ball, you see Ethan Jordan immediately turn around the DB that's on him and start blocking him downfield. Obviously, you and I have talked about how fantastic Laomi is when he gets hands on, but Jace Atkinson, Ryan Spade, all of these receivers have this mentality that I'm going to work as hard as I can to try to get open so that Taylor can get me the ball. But even if he doesn't and he gets somebody else the ball, I'm still going to work as hard as I can to block downfield. And that's where great offenses are born from. You can have a star receiver, a star receiving group, and be a great offense for sure. But the way that you turn a 5, 10, or 15-yard gain into touchdowns is having that kind of a mentality from a receiver standpoint to say, even if I'm not going to get the ball, I'm damn sure going to make sure that my guy gets as many yards as possible out of this, if not touchdowns. And that's exactly what's happening. I haven't seen Ryan Hughes do the exact same. Now, obviously, haven't seen him in a whole ton of games, so maybe that's just coming and he hasn't had a true opportunity because he's been catching so many balls. But that's another layer to this offense, and it's why Laurier, one small piece of why Laurier has the greatest offense that I can remember seeing.
Yeah. And again, it starts with 13,
Mm-hmm.
and we've entered a territory where we were spending a good chunk of our day yesterday and looking at how this team stacks up against some of the great teams of the last, really, of this century, and they're up there. And then that raises the question, the natural follow-up question of, well, then how does Taylor stack up against some of the great quarterbacks of this century? And the answer is it might just be him. And I think it was one of those touchdowns to Ryan Hughes. They're in the red zone, and it almost looked, the replay proved me wrong, but it almost looked like he just
Mm-hmm.
Kobe just flicked it to, I think, Hughes in the back of the end zone. He's having fun out there, and it's a tough team to face because you flip it over to that defense. And I mean, at this point, we're just talking about how great Laurie is. It's not like we haven't done this all year long. You talked already about what Mateo, and you mispronounced it, Tom. It's La Quintana. Thank you very much. With the 2 sacks, Jesse Wilkins throws in another one, who's a guy that quickly made his name onto the list of people we don't talk enough about. Tom,
Mm-hmm.
as you and I are making up just random lists of stuff to talk about either now or in the off season. Hastings comes up with the interception. That defensive secondary was absolutely on point. Yeah, obviously when, Justin Guerrero gets injured, it looks like kicker punter Xavier Gervais is going to be the guy they're having to deal with for the rest of the game. Um, that's a bit of a different animal to deal with. Guerrero came back, but again, why this team's in the conversation for one of the best teams that we've seen is because that offense is as good as we've seen, but that defense holds serve with them all through the year, and it only has been continuing thus far.
Yeah, when you watch the production that this defense is doing here, I mean, you can see first and foremost, it is easier to play defense when you've got an offense like you do that's scoring points. But this defense is built for this now because obviously, you've got great run stoppers and guys like Chisenham and Incidem and guys like Ethan Gregorcic who are able to come up and make plays, and Jesse Wilkins, obviously. But when this offense is really rolling, obviously teams are coming into this being like, hey, I don't think we can really afford to run the ball all that much. We need to focus on passing. And that's where you've got Hastings and you've got Harnur Dhaliwal. And now with the return of Ethan Bayfield, like this is what this Laurier defense is really set up to be, in that forcing teams to pass the ball when it may not be 100% of what they want to do, and playing into their strengths by not only giving great coverage, but allowing guys like a Hastings, like a La Quintana, in order to get into the quarterback and start making big plays here. So this is really where the evolution of this defense is coming alive, where you're now able to say, we're going to completely take away one of your facets of offense by using our own offense and scoring as many points as we are. And now when you're down by 2 or 3 scores, now we're going to pin the ears back. We're coming like crazy to sack your quarterback and get pressure into his face. And if nothing else, we're forcing him into bad spots where you've got all-stars in the back end of that defense to come up and say, thank you very much. I'll take one of those interceptions from Jahari Hastings and really start pressuring guys like this. So this is a very scary team that's built off of the points that are being scored on their offense as it stands right now.
It absolutely, and man, you look at that final score. 7 of those points come on a blocked punt.
Hmm.
Scoop and scored on the Bishop side of things. One Mason McGriskin getting the touchdown for them, and then another one's added in the last three within the 3 minute warning of the fourth quarter. So a game in which purely on defensive alone, it's a sub 20 performance, and the touchdown added in when Taylor's already out of this game. To speak to the nature of it coming in truly in garbage time, and we talked obviously about already with the Scott Brady piece. He goes out to if he goes back to the AUS, what a continuing boon that is for the production of football we've been seeing out there. This was a good Bishops team. They obviously won a conference that's been touting a very good St. FX team for the last couple of years. So, it was certainly the pick that folks had. Laurier coming into Bishops and picking up the win. I can't even say I'm terribly surprised by the nature of this outcome, but it's just the more and more we see it, it's sometimes easy after the fact because, at least speaking for myself, I don't want to get too far ahead when you're in the moment to say, I can't remember ever seeing a better football team than what we're seeing from these Laurier Golden Hawks. It's easy to sometimes say that in the moment. It's getting harder and harder to try to be the person of saying, yeah, this team is spectacular. Maybe let's wait to the end of the journey and then we can, with a bit more sobriety, assess and evaluate. It's getting hard to be that guy at this point and not just be able to say look, this team is just collecting bodies left, right, and center, and if they get the job done, I mean, they're already on some special lists that from our standpoint we've been putting together thinking about where they stack up with some other teams and some of the individual plays on that standpoint. Tom, anything left from this Uteck Bowl that you want to set up?
Yeah, one last thing that I want to talk about, something that you and I saw on the special teams side of things. We noticed, obviously, in the OUA, teams do not want to kick to Tayshawn Jackson. And they're kicking that ball out of bounds, or they're doing whatever they can, or the coffin cornering, and rightfully so. Tayshawn Jackson has burned a lot of teams with the speed that he has and the elusiveness. But now, in the minds of Coach Robichaux and Coach Daly on the special teams coordinators, they're saying, hey, if you're going to kick this ball out of bounds or in a spot where our receiver can't get it, there's no point in setting up a return. So we're in constant punt block mode. And they got to Xavier Gervais at least once in that game. And now it's like, okay, sure. You either risk kicking the ball to Tayshawn Jackson, and ideally, obviously, because they're in punt block mode, they're not really having a lot of people back there to block, so you have a better chance, but he can still burn you. Or you continue kicking it out of bounds and you're just going to have to deal with 11 guys coming at you as hard as they can to try to block that ball. What a great idea to really put the pressure on an opposing punt team, because pick your poison. Really, pick your poison in this one.
And just with how good, and just stay on the special team standpoint, with how good Dawson's been. When your
Mm-hmm.
goal, and obviously for Laurier, they score sevens, sixes, and sevens as much as anyone else. But when your goal is to get points, we talked about this last year when Dawson was a bit off. It might change the way you attack offensively. When he's been nothing but money, you can just run your stuff offensively, and that our worst case, somehow we didn't score a touchdown, we can nail it from pretty much anywhere the 55 on in. This is a hell of a team. Shout out to Bishops. Good to put this one to bed, Tom.
Mm-hmm.
All right, Bishops, and especially to you, Liam Forsyth. Hell of a year. Way to go picking up that Loney Bowl first one. Well, first Loney Bowl, I suppose, for them,
Yes.
correct?
Yes.
So big shout out to y'all. Great year on the great year for you all. Quirion, I don't think you're picking up a heck. If I were a betting man, but great job on the year all around. Let's now move to find out who those Golden Hawks are taking on in the Vanier Cup, and you already know that because we've already said it. But that's Laval Rouge et Or being the second of the two teams to pick up the win on the road in this year's Coupe Mitchell Bowl. Final score from Mosaic Stadium in Regina: Laval Rouge et Or 17, the Regina Rams 14. Tom, where do we start with this one? We had talked about, and you had talked about it with on Crown Countdown Gridiron Nation, pardon me, on how expecting this to be a low scoring affair, and in a low scoring affair with these two clubs, probably would anticipate Laval picking up the win. That defense has been so stellar. And you look at the game for Laval, and we were when we were talking about the end of this game, since we didn't get a chance to watch it together, the very end of it, and saying, man, oh man, after that Marshall Erickson touchdown, it felt like it was over. Laval driving the field, leading to that touchdown there at the end of nearly at the end of regulation. Is like, wow, they put the drive together, that clutch gene that Desjardins has. We've seen him at the winning of Vanier Cup before. And then we were reflecting on that and saying, well, at the same time, though, they had been in the end zone twice before, been in the red zone, I should say, twice before, and fumbled one and lost it, and then had an interception and lost that one too. And then you say to yourself, oh man, Laval picks up 9 penalties for 105 yards, over double the penalty production or the penalty numbers that Regina racked up. And it's somewhat easy to look at that and say, oh man, Laval plays a little cleaner. They take care of the ball in the red zone. Worst case, they settle for threes over than instead of turning it over. And this game isn't close. Except all of that I just listed off, the 2 turnovers and even the forcing of the penalties, I'm giving all the credit to this hard-nosed Regina defense in making the Rougier uncomfortable and forcing those turnovers and forcing a bit of sloppy play for them, especially early on in the game.
Yeah, you have to look at how well this defense was playing to really understand what was going on here. I mean, yes, in that first half, Arnaud Desjardins finds Olivier Coupe for a 75-yard pass. He gets behind one defensive back in order for the big score. But other than that, there was no offensive production whatsoever here. This Regina Rams defense is legit. They really came out to play here. And it got me thinking, especially with every other team that's out there. Obviously, people were thinking that it was going to be Manitoba that was going to win the Hardy Cup or even UBC. And then even after that, Saskatchewan. Of all of the potential teams in those 4 teams that were in the playoffs, this Regina team, I think, had the best chance of beating Laval because of how good that defense really is. I think that even with guys like Jackson Tuchinski and Garrett Rooker and the offenses that they bring there, this Laval defense is also very stout. But I don't know if those defenses would really have been able to shut down Laval's potent offense the way that Regina was able to really give them a chance in here. Now, obviously, Regina would have loved to have a little bit more offense to help support that defense, but that's been the struggle with them all year long, is that Regina's offense has been doing just enough to get them into those games. And while we thought that just enough was that Marshall Erickson touchdown near the end of it, if you really want to beat a team like Laval and you want to get to the Vanier Cup and those national semifinals, you got to capitalize on every single opportunity that you get, which means turning at least one of those extra field goals into a touchdown.
Most certainly. And what I thought was so impressive about the way this game played out is that from the Laval standpoint offensively, you're kind of looking at it and saying, Olivier Coupe, is he going to have the outstanding production day, or is he, and then is that going to really draw all the attention? And then is it going to be maybe, he draws the attention and everyone else starts to eat. At the end of the day, he gets 10 receptions for 147 and a touchdown. Next to that, it's Mathieu Roy on top of the 13 carries for 67 in the yard. He's also getting 7 receptions for 50 yards, a lot of screen game, a lot of product of Regina has the deep routes on lock. Okay, that's my little release valve to Roy into the flats. And Regina, there was some clips I want to pull for teach tape of just the way they rally to the ball, the way that the defenders use their leverage to be able to make sure that the ball carrier, doesn't get extra yards. So at the end of the day, fascinating to see how for Laval, it still came down to Desjardins to Coupe and then Roy as this outlet valve. And on the other hand, man, oh man, from the offensive standpoint, though, yes, they would have liked to have a little bit more. Did Regina put the ball in Peltier's hand on the day? Obviously, Erickson with the big run to give them the lead, but Peltier 28 for 44, and he's getting the ball out around to these weapons. We obviously talked about how Deshaun Mims, that's the guy there, but the way that they've been moving the ball offensively is spreading it out, and it's the same thing on this day where Renzo Arenaza with 7 receptions, Emmett Stedman with 8 receptions there as well, Sirleaf with 4 receptions. Maybe that's a product of the way Laval played them, but it's again what gives me memories of teams like that 19 McMaster team winning a Yates, where at least where it's a really strong defense, but an offense where comparing Peltier to Duick, I don't know. I certainly like Duick, but it's an offense where they're going to move the ball out around. So obviously, these defenses super tight and did a great job on the day on both sides for these clubs. But offensively, seeing these two different styles was a very fascinating case study in how they both try to move the ball against tremendous defenses.
Yeah, when you really look at how well this Regina Rams offense was able to do, realistically coming into this game, I was really concerned about the production that the Regina Rams were going to be able to have on offense. And then how many times were they in a second and long scenario and Noah Peltier finds his receivers to move the chains? Guys like Renzel Arenaza, Emmett Stedman, Deshaun Mims, like these were stalwart receivers really doing some great things and finding those soft coverages in zone or a straight up beating man coverage at times in order to get those first downs really going here. So it was an outstanding thing to see. I mean, Renzel Arenaza, 7 catches for 86 yards, Emmett Stedman, 8 catches for 82 yards, Deshaun Mims, 6 catches for 67 yards. Like these were great receivers with great production here. And when you've got a guy like Noah Peltier, who, like Mark Lee and Deshaun, did a great job in kind of giving us some backstory in there. He wasn't the starter for Regina to begin this season. They had an injury to their rookie phenom, Owen. I can't remember the last name. My apologies. And Noah Peltier comes back in to take over his old role, and he obviously does enough to get them into the playoffs and ultimately win the Hardy Cup and to get into a national semifinal here. So the grit and resilience that this young man has is really off the charts here. And to be able to find his guys down the field and to be able to set up that Marshall Erickson touchdown at bare minimum was nothing short of amazing here. So Regina, despite being a 3-5 team limping into the playoffs, despite being 5-5 by the time they actually played Laval, did a hell of a job staying in this game and really producing when it mattered most.
And staying in this game is a great way to frame it because I feel like the game kind of slept walk for a little bit. It's, you kind of you take the easy route into saying, okay, hey, Laval, okay, at some point there's going to be the big explosive play. There'll be that drive. The defense will, make a big play, special teams, this, that, and the third. And you're kind of sitting there just waiting for it to happen. And then before you know it, it's the fourth, going to the fourth quarter, and it's tied at sevens. And the fourth is A, when you had to leave, and B, when the roof got taken off this game and the sky was the ceiling all of a sudden. Regina opens up the quarter, interception by Laval, leading to a field goal. Add on to that the fact that one of the one field goal that was missed from Laval, had a date with the crossbar set up. But so Laval goes up 10. The next drive for Regina is the touchdown to Erickson. Then Laval responds on the very next drive, giving us the 17-10 score that was able to hold out as Laval forced the turnover on downs in Regina's last attempt. So a game that just it kind of caught you by surprise when all of a sudden it was like, oh man, this game just had a cup of coffee, maybe a couple. But what a finish it was indeed. And hey, I got all my conference championship picks wrong, so I would have happily been wrong on my national semi pick. At least for this one, I don't know what we would have done if Bishops had beaten Laurier.
Mm-hmm.
I would have happily gotten this one wrong, and it certainly looked like that was going to happen for a while. Big shout out to these Rams. A heck of a game, heck of a season. Reminiscent in some ways in OUA context of that '07 Western Mustang team in Greg Marshall's first year, where you go from, what was it, 4-4? Sorry, like 1-4 early in the season to then making the playoffs and going on the run to beat Guelph in the Yates Cup. Certainly reminiscent of that team, I suppose. But hey, great job by them. You stood tall with one of the big bad bullies of U Sport football. You stared him in the eye. And I guess to quote the great Tim McAuliffe, no one lost on this day. We just ran out of time.
Yes, most definitely. But when you look at this Laval squad here, it really goes to showcase why we think so highly of this Regina Rams defense in particular, because Arnaud Desjardins has been having one hell of a year here. He finishes this game 26 for 34, 281 yards, 2 touchdowns, and the 1 interception. But Regina had this bend but don't break mentality. Like we mentioned here, 2 different turnovers in the red zone to keep them alive into this game. So Laval was driving the field. And like you and I kind of mentioned it previously, Laval gets the ball back with roughly 3 minutes and change left in the game, and they're pinned deep in their own end. Regina has just scored, so they're up in this one. It's 14-10. You can't settle for a field goal. You have to score. And I'm thinking this is exactly where Regina wants to be. Up with an outstanding defense that for the majority of the game has been shutting down this Laval offense here. And what does Laval do but drive the entire length of the field and in convincing fashion here with the way that they were doing this? I mean, when you look at the production that this entire team has had throughout the entire game, there's a reason why we were like, "Oh, yeah, this is great. There's no chance that they're going to do this." And then start the drive at 3 minutes and 39 seconds, and in 2 minutes and 20 seconds, drive the entire length of the field and score and get up 17-14 with a minute and 19 left to go. And that is the difference between championship teams. Not to say anything against the Regina Rams at all. This is not about Regina not executing. This is about Laval not being shaken by the big games, not being shaken by the fact of everybody was thinking, oh, this could be a real big blowout for Regina and everything else. This is leaning on your legendary head coach in Glenn Constantine. This is leaning on that offense and Arnold Desjardins and Olivier Cool, Matthew Roy, and saying, fellas, we need one here. Let's go down the field and let's showcase why the Laval Rougeois are the RSEQ champions and have been so dominant ever since their inception.
And it's all that. And it's also you're doing it in Regina's house,
Mm-hmm.
which you brought this up. Honestly, man, hey, Mosaic I've yet to be there. It's certainly on the bucket list. And I think you and I and Dakota are making plans to hopefully get there in the near future. It was a bit of a disappointment, especially when they show some of those aerial shots, and it's very cavernous. Hey, that's a province that we know loves their Canadian football at all levels and showing support, and it would have been nice to have that a little more filled up. I'm sitting here wearing the Vanier Cup sweater from Laval versus Saskatchewan 2 years ago in London, and you know what? Sask did a good job of coming out and filling the house with that one, along with the Les Rougeois. So I was a minor bummer because I want to add the piece in of how like and the Desjardins did it under the lights of mean Mosaic in front of a packed Regina Rams house, and it was kind of like,
Mm.
well, packed is a strong word to say, I suppose.
They didn't even pack one section of it. Now, shout out to the Regina Rams fans who were there, because the fans who were there were loud. We heard them on the stream and they had their face painted and everything. So thank you to those fans who did show up there. But like you mentioned, this is arguably the greatest fan base, not just in the CFL, but in everywhere. Anytime that you ever travel overseas or anything, if you see like knockoff football stuff that's going on, like NFL stuff, whatever, there is almost always a Saskatchewan Rough Rider of some kind in there. You see Sask fans at every single CFL game, regardless of where they are. We saw them in the Out East game a couple of years ago. That's far away as possible. They're still repping their Sask. This is a fan base that travels, that is so passionate. And when you have a national semifinal game in your own house, I don't care if it was cold outside, fellas. You're the melon heads. This is a stadium that teams do not want to play in because of how great those fans are. And we didn't get any of that showing up to the game. And honestly, it was heartbreaking because especially, and this is something that you and I have talked about a little bit, I don't think that fans truly understand the influence that they can have on a game, especially home fans to an opposing team. When you get loud and you start really messing with that opposing offense and you start yelling and screaming and whatever, you completely change the game for what that offense is able to do. I mean, my own experience playing in a Vanier Cup against Montreal in Montreal, now, albeit there's 25,000 people there, 24,000 of which are Montreal fans. I had to turn around and look at Marshall Ferguson as he's making the play and then tap my center when he's ready to say, go set hut. And the entire offensive line in our heads are saying, go set hut at the same cadence, just so that we don't go offside because we couldn't hear each other. Now, obviously, that's a packed house. That's a Vanier Cup. But even going into a spot, and I've mentioned this a few times, playing against Guelph for a homecoming game with 10,000 people there rocking that stadium, it changes the vibe. And especially with a lot of the younger players, like rookies or whatever, who aren't used to something like that, eyes can start to get big. You start looking around, you start seeing all these fans cheering against you. You change the makeup of the game. And I just have to wonder now, this is a Laval squad that's used to playing in front of 18,000 people. So it's not like they're going to get rattled by the people, but those are 18,000 home fans. How well would they have done if that stadium really was packed, even if there was a section that was packed and really rocking and making a lot of noise? So this is why we're so, folks, get out and support your teams here. Your Regina Rams could have used you.
And a relatively young Laval team as well.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, we know Desjardins is a wily vet. He's been on that stage and further. But across the board, a bit of a young Laval team. So to your point, and I'll tip of the cap right back to your McMaster Marauders. Always loved playing in those Yates Cup games in Ron Joyce. It was a raucous affair. Would have loved to have been playing at University Stadium for that Yates Cup, the way Laurier packed that house. And obviously we know as they're continuing to finish those renovations there, it'll continue to become the place to be. The place to be. Tom, final thoughts from the Coupe Mitchell or the Uteck Bowl?
There is a certain thing that separates teams in terms of how well that you can prepare, how well you can perform, and if you've been on these national stages before. This entire Regina Rams team, not just the players, but the coaching staff, are better because of this experience. Young coach and coach Mark McConkley now has the experience of this is what it means to play in a Hardy Cup. This is what it means to play in a national semifinal. And this is how we need to prepare going forward when we're ready to get back there. I think this is an improved Regina Rams team, and I definitely think that they are going to be the team to watch going into next season in the Can West. For Laval, this is championship mentality. This is the calm, cool, and collected under all of the pressure in the world and still being able to come out with the outstanding play and convert and keep their season alive and get back to another Vanier Cup appearance that these Laval Rougeailleurs have done here. So this is why Coach Glenn Constantine is the incredible coach that he is. But to flip that as well, one of the other things that came up on social media earlier this week, and something that I absolutely want to shout out, is that Coach Michael Faulds, he mentioned, and some people might have thought that he was a little crazy, but he mentioned this, and you and I have mentioned this before, that even if Laurier doesn't even make the playoffs, they still practice all the way up until the Vanier Cup so that they're ready and they're prepared for this. Coach Michael Faulds puts out a tweet mentioning this and then says to all of the former Laurier players, you are a part of this because of the culture that you instilled into this year. That is a championship winning mentality. That is one of the that's a great example of why you and I love what this man is doing. I have the most amount of respect in the world for Coach Michael Faulds, Coach Todd Galloway, Coach Ron Van Borkirk, and everybody on that staff that the Laurier Golden Hawks has. There's a reason why we love to see this team succeed, because of the players and because of the coaches and with that championship mentality. I cannot wait for this Laurier versus Laval matchup in the Vanier Cup.
And as they say, culture doesn't graduate, but it takes a person like Michael Faulds to instill, grow a culture along with all those other people you mentioned and the great players that have come through that program to bring them to where they are. Tom, outstanding job to you. You know, final thing I want to bring up, because you mentioned this yesterday, one of the beautiful things we talk about parity growing within the OUA, that we're the deepest and the best conference from 1 through 11. U Sports across the board, we had 4 different conference champions being represented on this national semifinal weekend with the Mitchell and the Uteck. It was Montreal, Western, St. FX, and UBC last year. We had a whole new crop of teams leading to a new matchup in the Vanier meeting. This year, there will be a new champion in the house. Tom, outstanding job by you, and we will be setting up that Vanier Cup later in the week right here at the 55.